on our journey of reading. But now I want to talk just a little bit about the two writers that we read for today, Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, arguably two of the greatest poets in human history, let alone American literature. And we'll begin with Whitman. Whitman, just want to do a few brief discussions of his work. I want to point out a few things in his writing. He was very much a poet of democracy. We see in the last section of Songs of Myself, I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. He is the common man. He is the voice of the common American citizen, is going to be prevalent throughout his works. Um, he is, according to Harold Bloom, the great critic of American literature, he says Walt Whitman is the center of the American canon. Uh, in addition to being a great champion for democracy, Whitman was an admirer of our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. Um, their politics don't initially align, but they ultimately align as Whitman becomes very devoted to the free soil movement. He believes that the land that gets expanded upon should not be open to slavery, and ultimately he kind of changes his political views because of that one political view. Kind of leads him to change some of his allegiances, and he becomes a great fan of Abraham Lincoln. Um, he writes probably one of the greatest elegies in literature, "When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed." That wasn't assigned in this class, but that was one of Whitman's great poems. He says in that elegy, he says, "And the great star early dropped in the western sky, in the western sky in the night. I mourned, and yet shall mourn with every returning spring," referencing the loss of Lincoln and his grief over that loss. Had a great impact on Whitman throughout his life. Now, turning to Song of Myself, I want to mention some other aspects of Whitman. He was a poet who loved the city and the extremes of the city. He grew up in Long Island, so he was kind of around rural America. Long Island at that point wouldn't have been, the metropolis area of New York yet, but he traveled there quite frequently. His family, he was from a family that was in carpentry, and of course, with all the building going on in Manhattan, that would be something that he would be connected to the city, even though he didn't grow up in it necessarily. He was around it and in it quite often. And if you look at section 42 of Song of Myself, that is on uh, page 60 or page 57 of our Norton Anthology of American Literature. Just want to remind everybody, you do need to get those three volumes, volume C, D, and E. But in section 42, he says, "This is the city, and I am one of its citizens." He puts himself as the poet, the poetic voice that is kind of our heroic voice in Song of Myself, is very much a product of the city, which was kind of unusual for poetic voices of the day. Um, the role of the poet in Whitman. He believed that the poet should be of the working people. He kind of states that at the very beginning of Song of Myself, with the opening lines of the first section on page 23. He says, "I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I shall assume, you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you." So we have that very opening that, he is the poet, but he is equal to his reader. There is no difference between him and them. Um, the Song of Myself that we read is kind of essentially probably the closest that American poets have gotten to an epic poem. There were many different attempts in the 19th century to write America's epic poem, like the Romans had the Aeneid, the Greeks had the Iliad and the Odyssey, the British had Beowulf, there was an attempt trying to write the American epic. Most poets failed at that. Whitman probably comes closest to it, and his epic hero is basically the poetic voice, and we see that throughout. Uh, Song myself. We even see some of the conventions of the epic poem. Section 15, that begins on page 31 of your textbook, is basically an epic catalog, cataloging all the different types of people that make up the United States of America. And he kind of just succeeded in this attempt at being the poet of America. The Another great poet and American thinker at the time, Ralph Waldo Emerson, when he read Leaves of Grass, which included Song of Myself, he congratulated Whitman on the dawn of a great career. Emerson got a little bit mad about the fact, though, that Whitman publicized what Emerson had written to him privately, but that was something that Emerson did congratulate Whitman at the beginning of this career, when lots of other people weren't quite as welcoming of Whitman's voice into American poetry. Um, Another important section of Song of Myself in section 7. Another important line um, from the poem. He says, I pass death with the dying and birth with the new washed babe, and am not contained between my hat and boots. So this poetic voice that Whitman is taking on is not he as an individual. It is beyond him. The poet is more than just he, Walt Whitman. That is important. He's not contained just by his hat and boots. But with that said, Whitman does focus a lot on the human body in his poetry. In section 3 of the poem, we'll see some examples here of where Whitman kind of his poetry was not well received in some cases by more of the prudish critics because Whitman was quite open about talking about the human body, which was often not something that that poetry focused on. But in section 3, he kind of focuses on the idea of the biological urges. He mentions always substance and increase, always sex. That was something that Whitman wrote quite often about in Song of Myself and a lot of his poetry. Very infamously, you see section 11 when you come to that section where you have the woman gazing upon the young men who are bathing. That is a kind of she is alone up in her house, but she is gazing upon these young men and having some thoughts about how she feels about them. And Whitman is sometimes, there is a lot of speculation about Whitman's sexuality because he did bring it up so much in poetry. There is a lot of homoeroticism in Whitman. But in reality, Whitman probably is best describing himself in section 27 when he says, to touch my person to someone else's is about as much as I can stand. A lot of the critics look at that line, look at other things about Whitman, and figure that this is the poetic voice of Whitman, but in reality, the body, other people's bodies, kind of was a bit much for him. He was a bit introverted. He was maybe more typical than most might think from just reading some of his more scandalous writings about that was very frank about the body. That may not have necessarily been his private individual self. Um, and finally, I want to close on Whitman by looking at section 51 towards the very end. One of the most famous lines of Whitman. He says, do I contradict myself? Very well, then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. So the poetic voice that Whitman is taking on is bigger than himself, is bigger than who he is as a poet, and kind of it's more about the poetry and the creation of it rather than Walt Whitman the individual. But he, because of the voice that we read in Song of Myself, is going to have a great impact on literature. And as Bloom said, he is kind of the center of the American canon. Uh, so we'll move along.